On today's show, the Minnesota Timberwolves are the best team in the Western Conference with a 9-3 record. How are they off to such a strong start this season? Why is the front court pairing between Rudy Gobert and Karl Towns working so well this season compared to last season? And is this success sustainable? It's all coming up right here at Locked On NBA.
You are Locked On NBA, your daily NBA podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On NBA, the biggest stories with the local experts. I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, also host of Locked On Rockets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. They're the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports because it's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, all you do is pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 players and their stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. Prize Picks is so simple to play. You can make your picks in less than a minute. It's so easy. They've got quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and an enormous selection of players and different stat types, which is what makes Prize Picks the #1 DFS app on the market. And with basketball season now here and in full swing, you can do combo projections across football and basketball with their Specials League, a league created specifically for combo projections that includes 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. For example, you can do LeBron James plus Travis Kelce at a 10.5 combo of 3-pointers made plus reception. So if you've been thinking about checking out daily fantasy sports, about getting into DFS, you've got to give Prize Picks a chance. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code LockedOnNBA, all lowercase, for a first deposit match up to $100. It's a free $100. Just go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. And again, use promo code lowercase, all LockedOnNBA, for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks is daily fantasy sports made easy. Joining us now is the host of Locked On Wolves, Ben Beecken, who you can track down wherever you listen to your podcasts and on YouTube. Just search Locked On Wolves. And Ben, the Wolves currently sitting atop the Western Conference, the best in the West to start this season, a 9-3 record. Let's start with how the Wolves have been able to get off to such a hot start this NBA season.
Yeah, it seems to be the perfect combination of everything Wolves fans have been hoping for the last couple of seasons, at least, right? So last year, Karl Towns only plays in 29 regular season games, and he doesn't get a chance to mesh with Rudy Gobert. That pairing is working out great. Anthony Edwards is taking what seems to be in the midst of taking what everyone's hoping is a major leap from last year was his first All-Star season. Could this be his first All-NBA season? Could he go from star to superstar? And right now, both Karl Towns and Anthony Edwards are playing like superstars. Rudy Gobert looks a lot more like the Utah Jazz version of Rudy Gobert than what the Wolves had last year in his first season in Minnesota. And it's just a deeper roster than what they had for all of last year. So it's and it's actually been a really tough schedule too. Like there's, if you look at who they've beaten Boston, they've beaten Denver, they've beaten Miami, they beat New Orleans twice. They've had some good fortune with guys missing games here and there for opponents, but for the most part, this has been a difficult schedule and a knock on wood, healthy Wolves team so far, and they've gelled extremely well.
And you mentioned kind of the double big towering duo of Gobert and Cat not really getting a chance for those two guys to mesh last season. This season, though, so far, third best defense in the NBA right now with those two guys in the middle. How have they been able to kind of how have those guys found success, I guess, playing with one another on the court, especially defensively?
Yeah, defensively, when they're both on the court together, typically the Wolves are putting Rudy Gobert on whoever the lowest usage player is on the opponent's offense. And they're essentially letting him roam the baseline and play free safety, if you will. Against Golden State, it worked extremely well, putting him on Draymond Green in the first game. Of course, the second game, Draymond got ejected a couple minutes in. But that's essentially been the role. And Karl Towns has then chased the next least used player on the opposing offense and has done a really good job. I know much has been said, and rightfully so, about his defensive issues in the past. And also, can he stay with smaller fours? Can he stay with quicker fours? So far this year, the answer has been a resounding yes. He's been up to the task. He's fighting through screens. He's chasing guys all around the court and just showing that he's really bought into that role. And then with Naz Reid coming off the bench, that allows Cat to slide to the 5 when Naz is in the game and still guard some true 5s, give him a little bit of a break and make Naz chase other opponents around the perimeter. So that's usually been the best, the best defense for the Wolves. Occasionally they'll switch up their pick and roll coverages. Rudy, of course, is really good at dropping and pick and roll, but they'll occasionally play at the level of the screener with Karl Anthony Towns. And so just kind of mixing up. They've also done a lot of zone with Rudy off the floor, which is a more recent development. So, yeah, in general, it's been really good. Up until the last 2 games, it was the league's best defense by far. They've had a couple of rough games, a back-to-back in Phoenix, and then gave up a ton of points in a win to over the Pelicans on Saturday. But for the most part, yeah, the defense has been incredible, and everyone's really done their part.
Where does this, I mean, is it like a renewed sense of buy-in that they have? Because it's not like they didn't do a whole drastic, we're going to change the head coach and do this and the other thing. Like, where did this new renewed sense of buy-in come from defensively?
I think it's a combination of, well, first of all, last season it started with D'Angelo Russell at point guard, and it started with no Nickeil Alexander-Walker. At the trade deadline, the Wolves swapped out D'Lo for Mike Conley, who, of course, even though he's 37 or whatever he is now, a little bit long in the tooth, he's still a much better defender on ball and off ball than D'Angelo Russell. There's no question about that. And then Nickeil Alexander-Walker has defended, as I think, better with the Wolves than he had in his previous stops in the league. And they got him at the deadline last year too. So the roster is a little bit deeper. There isn't really a weak link in the starting lineup defensively. I mean, you could say it's Towns, but everybody else is average or better defensively. You look at Mike Conley, obviously Jaden McDaniels is incredible defensively. Anthony Edwards is very good on the ball, and Rudy Gobert is a multi-time defensive player of the year award winner. So it's a little bit of a deeper roster. And it's also, yeah, I think the buy-in and also Rudy Gobert just being in better shape. Last year, he was coming off a Eurobasket. I know he played FIBA this year, but apparently last year he was just a little bit worn down. Karl Anthony Towns was sick at the beginning of the year, lost 20 pounds right before the season. They didn't get a chance to figure it out defensively, and you still had D'Lo at the point of attack. And now this year, McDaniels has a year more of experience. Anthony Edwards has a year more of experience and has really bought into this whole, like, I'm going to be a two-way player. I'm going to be a well-rounded player. You have a healthy Rudy, a healthy Cat. And also, I think another year of Chris Finch. I mean, last year was actually his first full season. So this is year 2 of Chris Finch. And I think that having that continuity certainly helps too. So I think it's a combination of making the roster a little bit deeper, getting guys a little bit more experienced, getting guys a little healthier. And it's all at the moment, at least, kind of coming together at the right time.
And let's shift gears here to the offensive side of things, because Anthony Edwards, you talked about him kind of taking what is hopefully that superstar leap this year, but then also kind of balancing, right, the offensive production between what he's able to do, what Karl Anthony Towns is able to provide. We saw just the other night, Karl Anthony Towns hitting the game winner against the Pels with no Anthony Edwards on the court anymore in that game. Kind of walk us through how those two have been kind of sharing the offensive load and how they've kind of, I guess, taken turns, whenever one has it going and the other one maybe doesn't.
Yeah, for the most part, the offense is still running through Anthony Edwards, but in the last week or so, we've seen that shift. Cat had a really pedestrian game, to put it nicely, against the Boston Celtics a couple of weeks ago. Since that point, he's basically averaging 25 and 10 with, 4, 5, 6 assists per game. And the shooting efficiency has gone way, way up. He was shooting well below career averages before that Boston game a couple of weeks ago. And since then, the Wolves are starting to shift a little bit more of their offense towards Cat. They did it in Golden State when Ant had an off shooting night and Cat got hot, and they just started running a lot of what Chris Finch does is he likes to describe as bumpers for the offense. He doesn't call a lot of set plays, at least not as many as a lot of coaches do. And, Wolves fans know Ryan Saunders used to all the time. Tibbs did all the time. And Chris Finch is more like, hey, let's put up some bumpers. Let's let mostly Ant go to work. Well, in the last week and a half, he's been calling a lot more set plays that run through Karl Anthony Towns. And it has coincided with, I think Cat started playing better first, kind of in that ancillary role. And then now it's like, okay, he's got it going. He's just a more efficient scorer in general than Anthony Edwards. And teams can't double off of Ant. Jaden McDaniels shot 40% from 3 last year. Mike Conley's a 40% 3-point shooter. You're not doubling off those guys. And the other thing is Cat is really good at actually has better passing chemistry with Rudy Gobert than we've seen from Anthony Edwards. It's improved from Ant, but Cat gets more assists to Rudy than Ant actually does at this point. And so more and more of the offense is starting to run through Cat. The reason he ended up getting that final play against the Pelicans, yes, he was the best player on the floor for the Wolves. Ant had just fouled out, so that was a big reason for it. But I also tend to think, I said this on the show, actually, today's show at Locked On Wolves, is I think that play goes to Cat even if Ant's on the floor, because Cat just had it going. He was 10 of 11 from the floor in that game, but made both of his 3-point attempts, is getting to the line at a high clip. So it's been kind of this perfect, like, as long as both guys are happy and playing well, on any given night, you're going to emphasize one guy more than the other, and that's okay. Nobody seemed to have a problem with that so far. I think they both understand if this team wins, they're both going to be all-stars. They're both going to be all NBA. And so far, so good.
What about this strong start to the season makes you think that this success is sustainable for this Wolves team?
Yeah, I think I mentioned it right off the top. I mean, they had a tough schedule. Like they've beaten good teams, and I think that feels a little better than like if they'd been beating up on the Pistons and the Hornets.
And yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's part of it. The other thing is nothing really jumps off the page as like this feels like an outlier, right? If anything, they have things that are gonna improve, like Cat's 3-point shooting. It would be maybe first and foremost there. But like I guess maybe the defense in general, the first 8-9 games was just so incredibly good. But you figure like that's sustainable because you have Rudy Gobert, you have Jaden McDaniels, you have Anthony Edwards, who's proven to be a good on-ball defender. So I don't know that there's anything where you're like, oh, small sample size. Everything kind of feels like the best case scenario of what everybody wanted it to be, what Tim Connolly thought he was putting together. And the other thing is Ant's only going to get better. Karl Anthony Towns is only going to, he missed a chunk of last year. He's just now entering his prime. What we've seen from him for the last week and a half is what I think we'll see from him moving forward. So this season, at least, and like next off season and what happens when, Cat's Supermax kicks in, that's another question. But for the next, 70-ish games and into the playoffs, hopefully, this feels very sustainable. And they've had some rest advantage games and they'll have some more back-to-backs as the season goes on. But in general, this has been a tough schedule. They've been, there's no crazy outlier performances to this point, really. And it feels like their calling card is going to be a top 3 or 4 defense and hopefully a middle of the pack offense. That's the other thing is the offense is hovering around 20th in efficiency. So I don't think it's going to get worse. I mean, it was 23rd last year. Like it probably is only going to get better. And the defense is mostly sustainable too. So I think we're looking at legitimately one of the best 3 or 4 teams in the Western Conference, if not a top 2 team in the West when it's all said and done.
Can the Wolves continue their defensive dominance? Will they finish the season as a top 4 seed in the West? A brutal Western Conference this season, I might add. You'll have us covered for all that and so much more over at Locked On Wolves. Ben, thanks for stopping by Locked On NBA with me.
Thank you for having me.